Hi, I'm Dr. Nancy Crupi. I'm a biologist with 15 years of academic research experience internationally, and I've been working on a lot of different things, and ultimately I have also had to overcome a lot of personal challenges. I'm here to guide you towards awakening and ego death. Ego death and trauma healing are the most important tasks we need to accomplish today for humanity. The second season of the New Earth podcast is going to be specifically focused on giving you stories so that you see the trails and what kind of breadcrumbs you need to follow for you to reach your own ego death, for you to reach your own trauma healing, and for you to embody your highest self finally. Let's start. Hello, everyone. Welcome again to a new episode of the New Earth podcast. Today, we have a very famous guest, which is Jay Levin. He has been the founder of the famous LA Weekly. If you guys have read it at some point, he's a former journalist and he's now the founder and chair of the nonprofit Equip Our Kids. Hi, Jay. How are you doing today?
Hi, good to see you.
Good to see you as well. I love meeting you. And honestly, I'm really, really proud that people like you walk the earth and really dedicate their experience, their expertise, and their skill set to make our world better. And what you're doing with your nonprofit is really incredible and really, really kind of you to really use your experience in this sense. And I love when we met that you told me something that I feel like really struck me and it was, I'm gonna do this till the day I die. I loved it because I feel like it really gives the sense of like the fact that you're really on your mission and you found your purpose and you see how important it is to really start from our children, from our kids, to really make the world better, because you need to start from the roots, from really like the little plants that grow. And if they grow well, then the world is going to be well, right? And so everything is going to get better. So what is exactly what is the mission of your nonprofit?
So Equip Our Kids is basically a nonprofit and pro bono, meaning the work we do for others is free, campaign to market, brand, and make public awareness for an education curriculum and movement called social emotional learning. So if you imagine why people go to therapists or to try to retrain themselves or go into various kinds of retrainings or how they relate to the world, it's because they feel maladjusted and maltrained to be in a society that is itself very maladjusted and very maltrained, right? So what social emotional learning is the best of human knowledge taken down of transformational practices taken down to child level. And it comes out of child psychologists, academics, students, research studies, um, high quality, high thinking, careful people who said, what is the best tools we have to start training our children in the way of being in the world, to deal with the world as it comes at them in ways that don't aggravate the world and aggravate themselves. It's a very simple premise. The hardest premise for the human mind to get is that how simple it is, because we are all part of the maltraining. If you think about how many times a day you judge yourself or judge some other human being, you're right in the matrix of what's going on, right? So the understanding of the people who thought this through, tested it, created the curriculums, created the practices, is that over the generations, human beings have developed tools that they don't widely apply, and in modern life, a lot more tools as we understand psychology and the human brain better, and that those tools really allow us to learn how to deal with our emotional inner emotional lives, our reactives, particularly our reactiveness, and our relational lives, how to deal with another human being so you don't contribute again to the sense of conflicts, me against you. Am I good enough? Are you good enough? Are we buddies? But you really get evolve into a much different state of mind where your ego stuff, your survival mechanisms are transformed into a mindset that is very creative, very collaborative, very loving, very upbeat, right? And when you do this collectively, when everybody is doing it and everybody starts to practice these skills and do it together, what you get is communities of kids who relate to each other amazingly beautifully, right? Who come out of bad places. There's a school here in Los Angeles that had just 1 year, they had like 263 serious discipline incidents, some of which, this is in a poor school area, some of which landed kids in jail, juvies in jail or
They collect this school to
schools, yeah.
jail pipeline, you know?
And then the state gave them a test grant to put this curriculum in really serious ways. So 3 years later, they were down to 19 incidents. The kids were now competing from one of the worst schools in the district to one of the best schools in the district academically. Dropouts had gone away, gang stuff had gone away, violence had pretty much gone away. Kids' moods were happy to come to school because they had learned how to relate to each other in healthy ways. There's story after story across the country. This school happened to have the privilege of having this big grant so they could do it comprehensively and do it right and correct their mistakes. A big deal about implementation in the schools about social emotional learning is, it's a whole new experience. Everybody's got to be retrained, teachers, staff, et cetera, to relate
Teachers
to.
especially. I
Yeah,
think we don't realize how important also teachers are in this kind of thing, in the sense that like as
super.
we adults are maladaptive, you know, and we have been trained to go against each other. And this all comes down to our socioeconomical system, you know, because if we live in a country that as a capitalistic system that needs to grow and pushes people to grow, to start a rat race, the way in which you do that is by incepting people to be very individualistic. And not only that, but there is a lot to do also with nutrition and with the excessive consumption of meat in Western diet, you know, and today we have the governments are trying to put patches on what they've done,
Right.
because excessive consumption of meat also induces a very individualistic and very predatory kind of mindset, because if you eat meat, you're a carnivore. If you're a carnivore, you're a predator, you know?
Mhm.
And so all of these things have really created our society today that is very maladaptive, as you're saying. And so we really
Yeah.
need to retrain. And I love what you're doing about this social emotional learning. It's called S.E.L.
Mhm.
It's a very famous method that many schools should definitely adopt today, but there are a lot of studies about how important it is. Yeah, you were saying?
Yeah. Well, one of the interesting things about what happens in the schools once these kids are really in that other mindset, this collaborative mindset rather than the me against you and how am I doing mindset, um, is that they look at the world, they take in information much better. They become aware of their bad habits and are supported in changing them. And they get interested in the world. They go out and do great community stuff. They see what's missing and they say, that shouldn't be that way. We can fix that. There's stories about kids doing great projects all around town, all around one of the nearby communities. When they had a water crisis, it was a bunch of middle schoolers who came up with the plan. They said, let's fix this. And they came up with the plan that was adopted. This is a district with a lot of social emotional learning kids.
That's
So
amazing.
to liberate the mind is always chattering away, as we all know, unless you're a great meditator or unless you've figured out how not to get your mind chattering away. And what it's chattering away at is trying to figure out what's the right next move and how am I going to what's going to happen to me here and here and here, right? What that does, that part of the brain operating, is it takes you out of the knowing divine part of your brain, the part of yourself that's intuitive, that can, in many cases, turn into being psychic, that has a great sense of where to go. But that part of your brain is maladjusted to the fact that you've got, by the time you're at 12, you've got millions of neurons that have absorbed the patterns of human behavior, the patterns of human language, the infusion of judgment in almost everything you see. You can't turn on a TV or watch a movie that doesn't have a bad guy or a good guy. So we don't, I see social emotional learning as a huge antidote to the maltraining that's passed from generation to generation. I took a master's degree course in spiritual psychology, the spiritual being that who would you be and how godlike might it be if you weren't trapped in the behavior patterns, the thought forms that are passed along from generation to generation? And the answer is go find out.
Absolutely. I think everybody should find their purpose in this. Once you get out of these matrix, you definitely should go find out your purpose. And like really what you're doing is incredible, because I think you're really dedicating your time to something that is absolutely necessary today. Like the reason why we have wars today is because our kids did not have social emotional learning in school when they were young. And like it's not just about having that. This has been, the universe is just how I perceive the universe. And now most likely you also perceive it is very egoless, in a sense that it's all forms that change and it's very dynamic and things happen, but ultimately there is a homeostatic state that needs to be rebalanced, because when you have a peak somewhere, then you have a dip somewhere else, and then that's what our disturbances we have in our society: wars and killing, and a lot of rich and a lot of poor, and all of these like peaks, instead of reaching peace and calmness and finally reaching a state of, okay, we're good, like we understood what is going on, right? And this has to do with like really the trauma, the wave of trauma that travels and that has affected us, and that we keep perpetuating through those wars. Like our generation is 4 or 5 generations away from Second World War. Like all of those generational trauma is a real thing, and it gets passed down genetically and epigenetically, and then that causes the brain development to change and people personality to be different and to be also lesser. I think what you're also talking about when you say, when you finally get trained and you get out of this maladaptation, you become more creative, more capable of solving problems, of seeing that something is wrong and it needs to be fixed. So that is really called being present and being in the here and now, that our parents were not. Our parents were really trapped in the matrix. They were really trapped in this rat race, believing they had to do this. And sometimes in the rat race, sometimes if they were, baby boomers, they were just really, hey, we're gonna get it all, like all of this sort of like still a maladaptation, like not understanding that. I feel like China gets criticized a lot for imposing the one-child law, but in a world in which you can't have everything for everybody. If we are 10 billion people on this planet, you need to pose some limit to growth. Otherwise, if you allow the gazelles to grow too much, after a while you're not going to have any grass, and the gazelles are going to die as well. And so we all have to understand that we can't be, that's the ego, right? That we can't have everything, that we can't be above everybody, that we can't be grandiose, that everything has to do with balance and with being able to work and function as a community and loving each other and understanding we're all part of this huge being that the universe is, that the earth is alive. So it's all part of that too. So it's beautiful what you're doing, and it has a lot of neurological implications, because our brain, like I would like to give people a little bit of introduction. I talk about these a lot, but people sometimes binge listen to the podcast, and so they may start from wherever. So I would like to give them some introduction how the brain works for them to understand why this is what you're doing is so important. And it's really how it works is that we have three main parts of the brain. One is the reptilian brain. The other one is limbic brain, which is like around it. And then we have the cortex, the cortical part of the brain. So the pre-cortex and the cortex. So these two parts are really the most important ones for evolution. We are at a stage in our evolution right now that we are evolving and we are strengthening our cortical brain. And so that part of the brain is the most evolved one, the one that you want to nurture. However, because before we were in our fight or flight mode and guided by trauma and by the ego, we were mostly in their inner part of the brain, which is lesser evolved and lesser capable of being present and more into this constant race. So what I feel like most people don't understand is that their behavior is a direct consequence of what part of the brain they're using and what part of the brain they have activated or they have nurtured. Because we get to a point in life in which our brain doesn't develop anymore. Like we can have plasticity in the brain, we can change things, but not as much as children can do, which is beautiful, exactly what you're doing, that you're starting from children, because you cannot change adults' brain development any longer. What you can do is to kind of change it with like improving plasticity, such as with microdosing of mushrooms. That's what a lot of people are doing today. Or meditation, or a lot of like things that allow people to have a better plasticity, including music. And we talked about music healing as well during one of the first episodes of the previous season. But really, reality is that our brain doesn't really change as much when we are adults. And so it's important to start when we are children, so that we start, instead of hyper developing this inner part of the brain, which is the one that is in charge of the fight or flight modality, of the right brains, of make us subscribe this maladaptive matrix of society. What we can do, because that part turns off the cortex. And so if we don't get out of that part soon enough in life, we get stuck in there. And even more, there is like another level, which is like kind of in between these two, which is a level in which the kids develop the prefrontal cortex very early in childhood due to trauma, because the prefrontal cortex is in charge of decision making. And when kids, especially people who have, as adults, narcissistic personality disorder, people who have developed the prefrontal cortex very early, in a sense, and they've become hyper vigilant. They had this trauma that made them realize that the world is hostile, and so they try to develop a better awareness of their environment, but they're still not in their here now. They're really Machiavellian. They're really trying to strategize all the time. I mean, they become covert and passive aggressive against others, and so that's really when we talk about malignant narcissism. That's a consequence of not teaching kids to deal with their emotions and to nurture their consciousness, and instead placing them as they are in an environment they perceive correctly as hostile, because our environment is hostile unless we change it. And so it's really something that we need to deal with since kids. And I think today a lot of schools are going in that direction in the United States, because I see that there was a huge prevalence of narcissism in the United States due to meat consumption and to this hostility of capitalism. Like you can become homeless any day. And so what do you think is going to happen to a kid's brain constantly put under pressure by his parents to survive and constantly survive? That's what we become. That's how, when we develop narcissistic and opportunistic kind of behaviors. And so it's beautiful that instead you're trying to give to kids the safe environment that they need to skip this kind of trauma and to go straight up to their cortical brain, so that they can nurture the cortex, because the cortex is something that usually in our generations we used to develop kind of late, like after 20 years of age, because it's a part of the brain that is usually turned off by this fight or flight modality, by the judgment, by the judging mind. And so only after you learn to develop the prefrontal cortex and to become aware, then at that point you are allowed to also activate your cortex and to use it and to nurture it. But before then, you're in a brain fog, you're in PTSD, you really don't know what is going on, you're triggerable. So when you are in that kind of mindset, you are not in your cortex. Being in the cortex means being present, being capable of handling your emotions, of being out of your ego, of understanding how to deal with others and with communities in a healthier way. And so that's really what we need to do. But as adults, it took us a long time to get out of that generational trauma. And so our generation activated the cortical brain very late, and some of us never do, in the sense that really a lot of people stay in their fight or flight mode throughout life, also due to abusive relationships and to the schools that don't allow them to properly develop, and to, as you're saying, the news and everything that give people these constant triggers to stay in their fight or flight mode, right? And so it's beautiful that you're starting from kids, because I think, and I don't know whether this has been studied already, but I feel like if kids are taught these sort of things very early in childhood, and they are taught to handle their emotions, that, you know, to not subscribe to the matrix, I wonder, are they resistant to the matrix? Are they capable of understanding that most of what people believe in and what the news try to make you believe in is false? Or are they still sensitive unless they keep nurturing that? What do you think? Do you have any experience on that?
Well, the best study about that was of 4-year-olds who had similar backgrounds, range of backgrounds, and they had an A-B group. And they found that they studied them, I think, for 25 years going forward, the A group and the B group. The A group pretty much maintained the quality of thinking, behavior, relatingness, etc., that they had learned. And so they were having far more successful relationships, far lower uses of alcohol, drugs, far less use of psychic meds, psychic meds to keep.
Psychoactive meds.
Yeah. So, and just better lifestyles. And the B group was having the usual 25% of people on meds and break up relationships, not aligned with their careers well, crime, more violence, etc. So there's zero question left that human beings can be trained out of the behavior patterns that have been passed along from generation to generation for eons and eons and eons, right? The history of it is that natural leaders became kings, kings became demagogues, everybody had to adjust to them. The men went home pretending they were being the king of the household, putting down the women, etc., raising their children in the same modalities. And so history is full of wars and rebellions, castle rebellions. Democracy came along, higher thinking came along, eventually it evolved, but it clearly hasn't evolved enough. We don't have Gazas, we don't have nuclear weapons pointed at our heads at this moment. Near 6 near nuclear war accidents already. We're living on borrowed time. We don't have a planet falling apart in the way that supports life, because we've deranged the planet so much in our combination of consumer needs, financial exploitation of resources, etc. So we've created a lifestyle that ravages the planet, and we're trying to fix it. And there's people trying to stop the fixing of it, because they benefit very much from the privilege they get, temporary privilege they get in this lifetime for this lifetime. So survival of the fittest means the survival often of the cleverest people at manipulating the system, and not always using their resources to heal the system, which we have a lot of happening. So now we come to the modern age, and we're pretty much out of time, and that's part of my driver. I think we're very much out of time. That we could have a Gaza right now, right? That we could have all these wars going on, that we could be doing the damage to the planet that we are without sensible solutions. That huge numbers of kids are still being trained in the old ways of being in the world, the survival, me against you ways of being. I got my advantage. I'll help you as I can, but otherwise, um, I got to take care of me first rather than we collaboratively know how to take care of us and do it really well and do it smartly and live different kinds of lives and not necessarily be at each other's throats all the time. So we do not have an overall healthy world, and yet we have the rising awareness of consciousness, rising trainings and ways to be in the world that are helpful, coming out of the therapy movement, the self-help movement, the Asian mystical movement, all these movements happening. In Jewish life, there's the Kabbalah prophecies that said we're at the end time now. And they're not going to tell us we're going to keep going forward or not, because it's really up to us to evolve fast enough not to destruct. So when I learned about social emotional learning and went to some schools and saw the kids change and saw how they incredibly, amazingly had learned to relate to each other and the products of that because they're trained in it. It just reaffirmed for me something that I had learned in my journalism years and I learned in my part-time coaching years and all the courses and workshops I took as a journalist and not as a journalist, which is a very simple premise that is very, very hard for the ego mind to get. And the simple premise is 98%, except when you get hit by a truck, and maybe part of that is also dysfunctionality. But of human pain and conflict is lack of skills to deal with what life throws at you, and you're maltrained with it. And we need the better training. And when you get that better training, the outcomes are different. The world is just totally, totally, totally an effect of how we're trained on it. So,
Absolutely. So what is an example of kind of practice of a class of social emotional learning?
well, social emotional learning is a series of classes. It's a life skills training in a variety of life skills methods. So the early breakthroughs had to do with, actually came out of Mind Up, which is the Goldie Hawn's project out of her meditation practice. It's basically being awareness practice, Mind Up practices. So Mind Up practices, what are you really feeling, just thinking, being aware of what's going on in your own mind, and then learning to be aware of your own emotions. So those are early steps. Next step is learning how to manage your emotions. So you're not acting out. What alternatives do you have to acting out on your emotions and your sense of being violated, or you got getting your needs met, or you're angry about this or upset about that? So that came the next set of curriculums. After that came the sense of curriculums about how to recognize what's happening with other kids, right? Why is somebody behaving this way rather than just saying they're bad? What's really going on with them? So a much more kind of simplified. Sometimes it's taught with storybooks. We have a nice video of it being taught with storybooks from one of the schools in one of the poorer neighborhoods here. But it's a learning to how to recognize what's happening and then to be empathetic to it and then how to respond to it. So then you start learning languaging to respond to it. As you get older, that languaging becomes more sophisticated and becomes fairly sophisticated nonviolent communication languaging. So it's compassionate ways to address something rather than say something or do something that's going to push the other person's trigger even more rather than bring them more into a sense of coherence with you or a sense of collaboration. And then there's also the fact that, life can be overwhelming. So you might want to hide out. You might want to meds. You might want to get your homework done, all this kind of stuff. And so there's a discipline of learning to make good decisions and how to do that. And then it becomes a conversation with the other kids, and then it becomes supported by the other kids. What's a better decision? Until you're learning to more to trust your higher self, knowing then your reflexive, I got to get this at this moment to feel okay. And Johnny just hurt me, and I got to go kill him and tell everybody else what a bad person this kid is, yeah, etc. So, we're in a pathway to learning this training. Brain science, as you pointed out, has really helped a lot because the brain science 1,000% supports the idea that, consciousness, higher consciousness is a function of a different part of the brain than the amygdala, reactive survival consciousness. And can we evolve a species, as a species, can we evolve to a place where we don't do all the damage we do? And then, in fact, is we solve all the damage we do. And the answer is we can. It's just we got to apply ourselves, and we got to overcome and combat the resistance to it built into the system and the behaviors of other people and the mindsets and judgments of other people. So Equip Our Kids was founded to help the people who created the movement, the educators, the child psychologists, the developmental people who created the movement, and when I first learned about it, were basically unknown to the public. So it was very, very little buy-in, and it was mostly a conversation among educators when I learned about it. And I thought, well, I'll use, I have some media skills I can apply, and I've always been looking for and testing out various causes and things like what's going to make the most difference. I've started 6 nonprofits dealing with, but as I became a bit more wiser myself and more experienced in the world, I recognize that everything is just an outcome of how we're trained, and that it's all a skill set. And if we can get a different skill set going, we're going to get a different mindset going. We can get it. So here's this group of people. I think, wow, these are fantastic people. They've done a great deal of fantastic work. They've built a foundation of institutions that have nurtured this, and are starting to work to get it out to the public. And I thought, well, if there's any one thing in the world that can change the world, it's retraining mass populations. So, we have all the grown-up ones, the Mind Springs and the et cetera, and all the new coaches, life coaches coming along. Who doesn't have a life coach these days? Who doesn't have a therapist? All that's part of the building up of a different set of ways of reality, and unevenly so. But if we can get the kids early on, because they're the easiest to train before they got millions of neurons running on the current system, and we can give them a different neural net with this training, then they're going to be closer to the amygdala, so they're going to make out of their amygdalas closer to their higher brain cell, and they're going to make better, wiser, more divine guidance decisions for themselves and in relationship to the world. So that's why I chose to dedicate my life to that, because I think it's the fix for all the other fixes. When I give talks, I tend to ask people in the group. Sometimes if I have time, I'll have a half dozen and say what it is. What do you think is the most important thing to fix them, change the world, right? And then they say, end poverty, do this, clean up the ecocide, et cetera, clean up the environment. And then I say, okay, now I'm going to tell you mine. And I walk through the whole process of this, and I say, you have a good idea, but that's part of a bigger idea of how you're going to get people to this mindset to do it. So it starts with changing the mindsets. Otherwise, we'll never have mass change, because the other mindset will always come in and dominate, right?
Yes, absolutely. And, I have a whole way of perceiving that and kind of theory of how the world really works, in the sense that I think that with, first of all, what you're doing is helping really like a bigger evolution of things, in the sense that as much as, you know, we're made of layers, as much as our brain is made of these layers, and we need to reach the most external one. And once we finally are capable of nurturing that part, you know, everything closes up and finally we're whole and we feel like, oh, okay, that's why I was here. I like, you know, everything else was just ego. I was just forgetting of
Mhm.
my purpose in the system. You know, like I feel like we're just
Mhm.
these beings that are partly developed, and because of that, they're like kind of afraid, they don't really understand what is going on, and how the connections, the neuronal connections in our cortex become more complex and start dominating over the rest of the brain. Then our consciousness starts dominating our life and our behavior. And it's the same in society, you know, in the sense that we also in society have these different layers of people, which are represented by the social hierarchies, you know. And we believe that people, the higher they go, the more awakened they are. Instead, it's the opposite. People that tend to go high in our society are those who are more in their fight or flight mode and try to dominate as much as the amygdala does with us. You know, like the amygdala tries to dominate our whole body, because the amygdala is the part of the brain that really triggers the fight or flight modality and
Yeah,
kind of like
for sure.
coordinates the other parts of the brain and sends signals to everybody to coordinate everything. And so when we are in these planning modality, strategizing, I'm, you know, afraid and trying to fight against everybody, it's because it's our amygdala that is taking over. And the
Mm.
amygdala takes over not just our mind, but our whole body. Like, you know, the amygdala can really affect our thyroid, our hormones, our heartbeat, our blood pressure, our muscles contraction,
Sure.
really literally everything. It's really like we have these two modalities. As much as in physics we have the Newtonian physics and the relativity, the theory of relativity, that are considered like unreconcilable in a sense and
Mhm.
separate. And theory of relativity is what we're going towards the quantum physics of understanding our universe. In the same way, our brain works in the same way, in the sense that we have this part that is just about the mundane reality, you know, that like the Newtonian physics has to do with cause and effect, and, you know, hitting objects and gravity and all these sort of things, which is what we experience in the matrix, you know, when we look down and we're focused on really interacting with people at this horizontal level instead of having a higher perspective. And what the consciousness does is giving us this higher perspective on the world and on people, and the capability of understanding. I don't need to react. I don't need to react based on my triggers. I can be more conscious and understand we're all brothers and sisters. We're all together in this thing. And I have my own skill set and I have my role in the system, and other people have their own skill set and their own role in the system. It's like really like I feel like we've been thrown into the world, you know, without knowing what was going on. And our consciousness is slowly emerging. And initially we are this cell in a vessel, kind of like hitting all the walls and not understanding what is going on and trying to push others around and to make space for itself and to be like, I don't know what is going on. Then once we finally get to develop our consciousness, we're like, oh, wait a minute. I just have to surrender to the flow and be myself and have a function. That's exactly. And then that's the consciousness. And then you start collaborating with others and understanding that everybody has their own role in the system. But today we have a lot of people who are dysfunctional, because this kind of maladaptive behavior can go all the way to really dysfunctions that become, you know, people that start wars, for example, or kill others, or systematically oppress the population, or systematically oppress our kids to the point of creating pipelines. They go from school to prison, because in prison then they can use those people as slaves legally, because in the United States there is like constitutionally you can be a slave if you have committed a crime, which is mind-blowing, the fact that this is even a law. And so this is really comes down to, unfortunately, people who have gone so far in this activation of their fight or flight modality, and so far in this idea of separation as compared to everybody else, you know, instead of realizing they're part of a system, that they've become psychopathic, you know, they've developed psychopathies. And now we have these people at the governments and at the head of our biggest corporations and pharmaceutical companies and all these things. So if those people were kids too, so if we start really teaching to our kids like how to manage these things and how the real solution should be, instead of, you know, allowing them to be manipulated, then they're not going to fall into that trap anymore. However, my theory is that I think everybody has to have to actually reach consciousness. We have to go through all of these stages in an aware kind of way. And so what I mean is, so I went through a lot of narcissistic abuse, and I had to awaken from a lot of different kinds of abusive relationships at work and in life and in a lot of different ways. And I am a firm believer that what psychology has done so far, oftentimes with victims of abuse, is to really put them, not give them the understanding that in some way what they were being put through was wrong, by just simply justifying the abuser with they have a trauma, you know, they have a trauma, they are abusing you because they have a trauma. But by doing so, entire generations, and this is the reason why today we have this boom of this abusive society, is because for an entire decades, psychology has, instead of giving people the awareness, yes, you're right, they're wrong, which at some point is necessary, has given, I can't hear you, has given people as instead immediately started with, you know, like try to be compassionate. But by being compassionate, a lot of people can also allow, you know, themselves to be abused. And I've been through that myself as a kid. Like I had a psychologist telling me to be compassionate. I'm an empath. And so if you tell an empath to be compassionate, what you're going to be doing is you're going to trigger the Stockholm syndrome in that person. And so for me, it's very important to also, you know, as much as our kids grow and we don't trigger in them the fight or flight mode, and this is important because otherwise it's the amygdala that takes over. So we need to immediately start triggering the cortical brain. But I think also educating them in terms of the fact that the world right now is nonsense. I think that's also important. Like, how do you guys deal with that?
So one of the things I noticed in when going to schools and seeing kids go through this, first school I went to, I saw 10-year-olds who had been trained to solve conflict. They did a circle, and they were dealing with school issues, what stuff that came up and how this had happened or that had happened. So it was the collaborative of the school, not just the one-on-ones, although I saw very good interactions, healing interactions between one-on-ones as well. But these were, I saw 10-year-old kids who had well, as a journalist, I'd met a lot of really, really screwed up people. And, but I had the impression sitting there were a couple of kids in our class, I thought I would replace them with some of the guys I'd met who were high up in the White House. And I'd literally met and had a chance to sense who they were, right? As a journalist. So there's no easy answer to the fact that when you're living in this world, right, you are being inundated with a form of behavior and attitudes and ways of thinking that are they are perpetuating you almost in every conversation, right? Very difficult. In the closed form of the schools, where kids could practice it in that form, and that without the parents interfering, parents become an issue once kids actually learn this, and then you got to get it into the homes, and they're going home to looking at the parents differently. So the overall issue is it's going to be an uneven. It's always uneven, right? It's not going to be one night everybody wakes up and we
Yeah,
all
of
have
course. It's
skills.
in waves, you know, everything,
It's
the
in
universe
waves.
expands in waves. So there is a wave, and as that wave
Right.
falls down, a new wave rises up. And
Right.
so that's exactly how it goes. And it's not going to be until we reach that calmness that I'm talking about, that peace that I'm talking about.
Right. The major consciousness that has to happen on a mass level is to recognize, I don't know how you play, to recognize the depth and the tangle which we are in that fucks us up on a serious level. And that's not, and when you're in the ego state, it's me against you, and we got to fix this by getting rid of this guy or change this, rather than if you're in that state of mind, um, and that's perpetuating around you, then that's a matrix that the water you swim in. The judgment world is the water, and the survival world is the swim, the daily swim. But the species is making progress. We are making progress, and it is a race against time. Which consciousness is going to become dominant to the point where everybody just relaxes and says, well, yeah, let's just do it this way because it's working better. Community to community, piece by piece. And more cleverness, more of the people who have been through this process have to find their ways into leaderships in the communities. Remember, it only started hitting the schools in a major way under Biden. Because he put the first serious money in. It was just creeping along. Maybe when I started, maybe 5% of parents knew about it, maybe 5% of schools. We helped get it up to 75% of parents knowing about it. And, a good chunk of them asking for it and wanting it and not opposing it, though there's a big chunk of the country, still about 30% of the country that opposes it from the right wing people who are totally misinformed.
How can you be opposed to something like this? I really don't understand. Who is opposed? I
Because
mean,
you have to be told it's what is something it's not, right?
yeah,
So that very point they call it social emotional learning was just too academic for the average person to grasp.
yeah,
So when I started testing messages, I knew it would be dead in the water, and it was. What wasn't there, what turned out to be clickbait messaging was saying, uh, uh, what's the level of emotional intelligence of your children? And here's the skill sets. Do you see them acting that out because they can do this and they do this, and here's the skills they learn in this process. So that became clickbait. And then we started introducing it and making media for the grassroots organizations that have made the movement happen, the educator organizations that have made the movement happen. They're wonderful, 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 brilliant people, and they collaborate like no other. I've been involved in several social and political movements, and they collaborate better than any other movement, people in any kind of movement. Institution to institution, rather than me against you as an institution. So it's just got to be a slow unfolding of this person to person. The kids learn it. They have some setbacks. But it's happening in the adult world, the corporate world, which is a big bone of contention for me with me, and I'm trying to starting something to get that fixed. Is the corporate world has not really dived into supporting social emotional learning the way it did STEM, science, technology, and engineering and math. It's been almost oblivious. But because of COVID and everything happening, the kids coming back, there's more of an opening there. But that opening has also affected the workplace. 50% of people looking for other jobs. 38% of parenting employees say they're stressed out. Retention rates are threatened. The corporate world, the business world, not just the big corporate world, is dealing with a fair amount of human dysfunctionality.
yeah.
So a growing profession is what you might call social emotional learning trainers for your workforce. So more companies are starting to bring it into units in their companies, et cetera. These people, I know a lot of these people doing it, they're a chunk of them. So, but the question is, okay, that's great that that's happening, but now we need full-on support for this wave of money that came into the schools, not always well used under Biden, because Surgeon General, the education department said these kids coming back from COVID are blown away. They're not going to learn anything. They're too sharp.
And a lot of really learning disabilities in terms of not just disabilities, but the level of analphabetism has reached really, it's crazy right now. A lot of teachers tell me that they had to, because then it becomes also a matter of what am I going to do? I'm going to fail everybody. And so a lot of teachers had to allow kids to go to the next grade, but they are not really
Yeah, yeah,
ready. They
the
don't know
kids are
how to
not, yeah,
read. They don't know how to.
they're
Yeah.
coming into the workforce unprepared, which is our
Yes.
argument to the corporate and business world. What the heck? Are you only 5 minutes ahead in your thinking? You're not, 10, at least 10 years ahead in your thinking about who's going to come out of the pipeline from the schools. That's one
Exactly. But
thing.
that's why also they're implementing AI in a sense. Like I feel like it's all connected. And I think really how I perceive the world is very different than most people in the sense that like I really think about things in a physical term, like in terms of physics.
Mhm.
And I feel like right now I can really perceive, I have a form of like clairvoyance in a sense that I'm clairsentient, but I'm also a little clairvoyant. And I have this feeling that right now we are really at that intersection, at the crossroad between these two possible worlds. One is a world where human consciousness, humanity gets completely, not
Mhm.
completely, but almost completely replaced by AI machines. And with time, we're going to be just
Right,
populated because, our human body, it breaks too easily and goes into burnout when abused by corporations. And so corporations
right,
have more interest in growing AI and in developing AI than in developing our children and in developing our society, right? And so we're being depopulated. And the other side is that I can see how really the more I walk around in the world, the more I see how there are very, really very much two kinds of people in the world. The people who are very deeply traumatized and have deeply unresolved trauma, who tend to be more, people that start wars, that oppress others, and people
Mhm.
that instead are more towards the empathetic side, and they tend to, when they find themselves in this crossroad, they take the other road, which is going back to the
Right.
earth, going back to the land, protecting the planet, protecting it, which is all these
Amen.
people that like all the political activists in climate change and all the
Right.
people like like we are people, you and I are people who are choosing that side, right? But I can see a big side of that. And I have also kind of like an explanation from a certain standpoint. I feel like from a physical standpoint, going past humanity, if you will have to watch humanity as, in time and from a level that doesn't even allow you to see like humans, from a perspective is way above, like from how God sees us, right? I
Right.
feel like really all of this replacement of people with machines and things is also functional to our society because it allows people with deep unresolved trauma to evolve into forms that can't perpetuate trauma anymore. I feel like those are the people, because I feel like we reincarnate all the time, like, and we're building all of these machines, these robots, and they also are capable now of consciousness because we're building them to be
Mhm.
artificially intelligent. And so in next life, we're going to have lesser bodies to reincarnate in and more machines to reincarnate in. But those who are going to be reincarnating in those kind of bodies are those who function in a
Mhm.
very binary way, like a machine. And so those who today perpetuate the trauma into others and oppress others are going to be reincarnating in machines. And so they're going to be they're really stopping themselves from hurting others anymore, because I'm sure what is a robot, an AI? It's a being that, yes, is capable of intelligence, but is not capable of free will anymore. Like, and if you remove the free will, then at that point the machine cannot perpetuate that. So I can see how the world is like, we are really at the crossroad right now. And I think you're right that we don't have a lot of time, and I can really feel it. I am a political activist and I do a lot of different things to make the world better. And I can feel that we are at the time in which we need to push, but the universe is made to be perfect in a sense. And people like you and people like me exist because, and we push and push and push. And we are like, I'm going to dedicate my life to this because we can feel that the universe needs it, that the earth needs it, and this is the time, and we don't have any more time. And so things work in a perfect way in a sense. And if we are capable of making the world better, and I think we will, to be honest, I think we are at the stage in which we have reached the quorum needed for us, for all of this network of the cortical brain in our children and in us, as much as this cortical brain made of healers and political activists in society is really reaching the point where we are becoming a network. We are getting stronger. We are nurturing ourselves, and we are capable of now giving to the world the consciousness that it needs. And so I think I'm very positive in this sense. I feel like beyond all the negative things that are happening in the world, I feel like I have I have it tattooed on my arm. I have nothing bad can happen, which just simply means that everything is meant for the best. If you see history, and how it went, we're literally going towards having a better and better and better society, freed from suffering, free. And of course, it's never completely freed right now, right? So it's not completely freed. But we had slavery 100 years ago, and today, even if there are still slaves, they have to be enslaved using loopholes because it's not legal anymore. So this is to say that our society is evolving, to give people hope. But then we are the hands of the planet. We are the heads. We are the legs, And so what happens is not, I feel like I really don't like seeing people are like, I hope in a better future. I hope in something. I'm like, no, you got to put your actions into it, because nothing happens unless you make it happen. The earth doesn't have other hands other than yours. The earth doesn't have other legs other than yours. Your brain is the brain of the earth. Like we are the earth, the extension of the earth. And now the earth, we are in an era right now called Anthropocene, which means that humans have become the main force that shapes the planet. So before we had all of the different eras in which different forces shape the planet. Now humans are the main force that shapes the planets at a macroscopic level. But this is exactly the point. Humans are the ants of the planet. And so if you want to make something happen, you have to make it happen. You have to do it. You have to make choices in a different way. You have to choose the earth. You have to choose your children. You have to choose consciousness. You have to, steer away from things they don't actually bring any positive solution to the world, or that are short-lived solution that then will require even a bigger problem to be solved in the future, and start to just solve things one after the other, being present and be like, this all comes down to the usual choice that I always talk about. Like if you choose the light, if you choose the divine, if you choose innocence, if you choose really solve the problem in a way that is aligned with your inner source, with your inner light, with your love, then you inevitably make the choice of making the world better. Because what are you going to do? You make it worse, and then you reincarnate and you come back and it's the same problem, but worse, and you're here having to deal with it, right? And so all of these solutions are short-lived. So going back to the roots of teaching the children to be different and making them become resistant to being manipulated and to being used by corporations, by governments, for purposes that are really unconscious and egoic and they do not represent a solution, I think is an incredible way of thinking. And I wanted to, like a couple years ago, no, 4 years ago, I started thinking that I wanted to fund what I was calling at that time the University of Life, which was kind of what you're doing, but for adults, in the sense of teaching people how the world works and how to be better humans and how to solve the problem, what kind of traps are there for them to prevent them from making the next step in humanity, making the world a better place, but for adults, because adults cannot really change their brain development too much. So kids can, but I'm very curious to know how you got here. Like, so today you're the chief and the founder of this incredible nonprofit. You're doing these incredible things. You got 75% of parents to be aware and pro the social emotional learning in schools, which is incredible for me. You are moving towards convincing corporations, which is like, if you do that, you're incredible, seriously. You're trying to get
a huge challenge, let me tell you.
It's a huge challenge, but you're trying. This is incredible.
We'll see how it goes.
Yes. And so you're trying to get corporations to do that. You're trying to involve politicians. I think what you're doing is, I don't think you realize how much you have really walked in this path and how much you have really achieved. I feel like people like you don't usually stop and think, okay, I have achieved, other than to make sure that you have your milestones aligned and you're like, okay, I have to do this as a next step. But I feel like you don't realize how much really have done. This is incredible. And obviously there is a lot more to do. This is not the end point ever. You know, there is never an end point for people like you. There is always like you keep walking until you just change and change and change and change the world for the better. So, but I'm very curious to know your journey because this podcast is about journeys as well. And so I'd like to know how you got to this point. You went from being a journalist, a successful journalist, because you founded the Lay Weekly, which I used to read. When you introduced yourself to me, you're like, I found the Lay Weekly. I was like, of course I know the Lay Weekly. And I feel like you were surprised that I knew the Lay Weekly. And I'm an immigrant. I'm not even from LA, right? And of course I did. Of course I used to read the Lay Weekly. So how did you get from being the founder, and even before, how did you get to become the Jay Levin that we have today and to do all the things that you're doing?
So the way my perspective on it, right, the way I kind of catalyze it, and for me is that within my family structure when I was growing up, there was a lot of fighting. My parents loved each other deeply, but they squabbled nonstop. The level of conversation in our household was very low. And so I became a bookworm, which helped. And the and they were supportive in their way. You know, it's not that they were bad parents. It's just that they were caught in the matrix of low levels of training to deal with what was coming up with them emotionally, right? So I kind of stepped back from family affairs and thought, started reading a lot, and I thought there's got to be a better world out there. And as I learned that I had writing skills, I thought, well, maybe I'll be a writer. And then I thought, well, maybe I'll be a journalist because and when I was um, graduating college, I had my girlfriend and I got pregnant when we were 19, so we had a kid right away. And so I had to work full time and go to school full time. I had to figure that out. And then I didn't know what I was going to do afterwards because I was delivering mail to pay the rent. And but that wasn't obviously my calling. But then one day on graduation, I'd go to this building I had not really administrative building, and I passed a door that said employment office. And I kept going, and then something stopped me and said, no, go back. Just go back. Because I had little to do with the school. I was like,
You were delivering mail to pay the bills, basically.
uh-huh. Yeah, it was a full-time, I had two full-time jobs, school, and then I go home and try to get my homework done and then not get much sleep. At any rate, there was a drive in me to be a writer. And I was a reader, so I was good at writing. And I thought, how am I going to make a living if this can make a family? And I thought, maybe I'll do journalism. And there was a great writer at a New York newspaper. His name was Murray Kempton. He was just a literary masterpiece of work. And I thought, if somebody can write this well and this thoughtfully and this poetically in a news editorial column, there's hope for me.
Oh.
So I thought, and I had a cousin who worked at the same newspaper. He was a reporter at the same newspaper. So I started bugging him about seeing if he can find me an entry-level job at the paper. It didn't happen. He kept every couple of months I'd call him, or every 30 days, 60 days, anything, no, nothing yet. They haven't told me of anything yet. So then on graduation time, I have to file my graduation papers and all kinds of stuff. And I walk into this administrative building because I didn't do after school campus stuff. Hardly knew about other than go to classes. And I walk past this employment office. And something stopped me, like a little voice, or just something stopped me and said, well, it's not my nature, but let me go back in. Maybe I'll get a PR job out of it or something. Okay. So I went back in, I filled out a form. A week or so later, I get a call from the school that's saying there's a job opening in the financial department of the newspaper this very newspaper. And would you like to apply for it? I said, yes, I definitely would like to apply for it.
Wow.
So I go down, I meet the guy. It surprised me was it reached my school because normally they call Columbia, somebody from New York would call Columbia University, but he had just been imported from LA to this New York newspaper. So he put it out widely to campuses. I was at one of the city colleges, and so I went and I had this interview with him, and he said, I've got a lot of applicants. I said, I understand. And he said, okay, but I knew I got the job. And about a week later,
Why?
I just knew it. I just intuitively knew I had it.
So you knew it because you read something in the guy, or because you had this divine consciousness coming at you and say,
I
hey,
had just this knowingness. I felt very confident that I was going to get the job,
wow.
which was amazing. Because even to have been sent there, I didn't logically put it, I wasn't like classically spiritual in my thinking. I just said, okay, I felt I was going to get it, and I got the job. And it took me almost a year before bugging them they gave me I was an editorial clerk. It took almost a year of bugging them to give me a tryout as a reporter in the news section, not the financial section. Okay. And I got a tryout, young reporter. I think I was 21, 22 years old. And interesting enough, my father had worked in Harlem for some years, and I'd gone there as a young kid. And the first guys I really thought were cool were the black guys who worked for him. And yet I saw all the poverty around, all the degradation and stuff, and all the racism, complexities. And I was very sensitive to it. I thought, there's a lot of things to fix in this world. And so as God would have it, the very first assignment they gave me was to go to Harlem and interview a woman who had just started a new anti-poverty program. And I did, and they liked the interview. Next thing they did is they sent me to the East Village to do a story on a store that had just opened there. That was an outlet store for struggling Black Mississippi craftspeople. So I got involved right immediately with the entire social justice movement through this. And one of the things Murray Kempton wrote about brilliantly was the civil rights movement of the time. And then the latter days of the anti-war movement, some of that stuff happening. And or the anti-imperial. So I just started making friends in that movement. And very soon after that, LSD was suddenly becoming the cult of LSD was really spreading fast at this time around. And so I said to them, why don't you, they were already liking what I was doing, giving me more assignments. And I said to them, how about I do a series on LSD? And I did. How it was being used therapeutically, boom, 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 with the cults around it, how it was building out. It was like the wave, it wasn't the 60s wave, but it was a later wave of adoption for, across. And so they published my series. I got a full page for 5 days in a row. I filled a full page, which was exceptional especially for a young guy.
It just started, yeah.
Yeah, I just started, and they loved it. And so I said, the next thing I wanted, they said, what do you want to do next? I said, well, there's a lot of talk about modern therapy techniques and the Phoenix, all these drug treatment centers coming up. How about I do a series about the effectiveness of this, right? And they said, sure, go ahead and do it. And so I took time and went out and spent months sitting in group therapies and some private therapies. And I wrote the series. But what it really took away from me, what really nailed for me as a young man, was the idea that I already sensed, which is seeing people change over those months in their mindset and in their behaviors, really just nailed for me the idea that, including my own family and everything I was seeing in the world, that what I talked about earlier, human dysfunction is a lack of skill, it's not a lack of character, right? And we're really badly trained in that. So I started getting outside, even from Cosmopolitan magazine, and believe it or not, because of my quality of my writing and reporting, I started getting outside offers to freelance around some of these issues. I one as the spiritual, the occult and practices of the occult. So I wrote a series about that, which brought me in touch with the entire movement of higher thinking, magic thinking, ceremony magic, et cetera, like that. And so I became
Wow.
educated in that.
Now, what do you think about that? That's interesting.
Yeah, because, well, it just said, okay, there's higher levels of consciousness. There's ways the mind can be used in different ways. People should watch the movie Superhuman. It's a documentary about, you'll see amazing things that the mind can do when it's unbound from thinking of what it can't do, including kids reading entire books blindfolded that they've never seen before and never getting a word wrong.
Where
Because
is this
the movie is,
documentary?
it's a documentary by Carolyn Coke, but you can rent it pretty cheaply on Prime if it's still there. So,
Okay, Superhuman.
yeah,
We're gonna put the link.
the first is not the best, but as it goes along, it gets crazier and deeper into and much more believable. And as somebody who's developed a lot of psychic abilities myself, knowing a lot of, having lived with a woman who's extraordinarily psychic and knowing a lot of psychics and having trained people on how they can be psychic, I understand that the higher qualities of the brain are very, very limited by the current
Way of thinking. Yeah,
way of
absolutely.
thinking,
As a psychic myself,
way of training and
way
educating.
of training us, but also it's like I feel like we all do have those skills regardless. We
Mhm.
just get told that those things are woo-woo. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
like
of
we
course I
have
know what you mean.
intuition. We're just told because again, we're surrounded by people who are maladaptive, dysfunctional in various ways. And because of that, those people have interest in shutting down our intuition, in telling us that we don't know what is going on, that in telling
Yeah,
us, in gaslighting us. Gaslighting, which has been the word, the most searched
right.
word, I believe, in 2022.
What's the word?
Gaslighting. Gaslighting is
Gaslighting. Well,
really manipulating others,
this
replacing.
is the Trump era. Yeah.
What?
Yeah, gaslighting in the Trump era. Who does that?
Yeah, like gaslighting is like, it
Yeah,
comes
yeah,
from a movie, It comes from a movie that is in which
right.
a woman was being gaslit by this guy that wanted for her to he gave him the money of
Of
her,
course.
like he wanted money basically. And so he started gaslighting her, making her believe she was crazy, making
Right,
her detach from her intuition, which is what gaslighting does.
right.
And we are in a society that is inherently gaslit by our institutions, by the media, and also it got so bad that now we have it at the lowest level of humanity. Like if before it was the media, the TVs that was gaslighting us and making us really replace our reference models internally so that we get dragged away from our intuition and we are completely given a fictitious reality that then we subscribe, especially as kids. And at the same time, now we have so many dysfunctional people that we have a lot of gaslighters in our surroundings. So the
Right.
great majority of people around us use some form of gaslighting, even against themselves. We gaslight ourselves. We have been trained to gaslight ourselves. And
Yeah.
gaslighting is a way in which we get completely misaligned from our intuition. And so we all have intuition. It's not that really, as you're saying, it's not even a matter of like not having those skills. It's not that we don't have intuition. We do. It's just that we're told that our intuition is not real. And so when people are like, I have this gut feeling that this person is abusing me or is bad, or is that this thing is wrong, or that this solution is not a real solution, or that the world shouldn't work like this, then you go and try and say it, and you have so much resistance from the world around you that you're like, maybe I'm wrong, And so people tend to stop there. And it's really about having the persistence to be like, no, I know I'm right. And I had to learn it myself, like, because it's all about persistence. Like, people around you are always going to tell you that you're wrong, because in a society that is maladaptive, everybody is in some way, everybody feels like they're doing something wrong and they feel judged, and everybody has interest in covering up what they're doing. And so because of that, people who really awaken to consciousness have had a hard time for a long time to really flower and awaken because of that, because we get dragged out. See the hippie movement, right? So the hippies have been awakening through psychedelics, through LSDs, and they've been oppressed by their system because it was too early for them to awaken in a world that was so maladaptive. And today I feel like we have reached a level in which we can really finally spring. We can really finally, we have the policies, we have, through history, we have modified the policies, we have made the world better, we have a lot of political activism, a lot of awareness in the population, that people really, now you can't anymore go around and oppress others, and that's okay. That's not okay anymore. They're going to attract a lot of resentment from the population. The population is about to rise up against a lot of abuses, and so I feel like today we are at that point in which
Yeah, look at how the
we
Democrats blew the election with Gaza. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, like all of these things.
People abandon their party in droves, especially
Yeah,
in
and like Gaza has been like what has been happening in Palestine has been happening for 100 years almost, like, so this is something for 100 years. Just we're talking about modern history. This is something that has been going on since forever. So the fact that now finally people are like, no, I want to hear about it. I'm not gonna shut up anymore. There are influencers that have gone from being movie stars to become full-time political activists in terms of to protect Gaza and to like make people become more aware of what is actually going on. So now it's not anymore the time. And women, today, like, women have been oppressed for a long time, and now women are like, I'm sorry, I'm not gonna move anymore. I'm good. I've
Yeah.
stepped backward a lot of times. Now you gotta kill me, but I'm not gonna go anywhere. So
Okay.
I feel like
I have about 25,000 responses to what you just said, but
25,000, what do you mean?
responses to what you just said. But I'll just focus on a couple. The when I was I spent about 20 years doing very part-time life coaching. That's the story how I got there, and I was very good at it. And I'll refer to you then I started doing workshops when I wanted to go back into media. I only did it full time for about a year. Um, the um, the question about intuition, when I was doing the workshops, right? Most people would say, I'm not psychic at all. My intuition is not very good, right? So I developed this practice. I kind of channeled this meditation where I take them into a mindset, right? And in that mindset, I would have everybody drop their keys into a container that everybody could reach into and pick out somebody else's key and then identify it. I did this about half a dozen different sessions, different groups. And then I identify it. I would keep track of the answers, right? The percentage of answers. So at the end, 85% of the people who said that you're not, almost everybody said they're not psychic. 85% of the people identified the right key for the person in the room. Then I would take them back through the meditation and have them peer up with somebody they don't know in the room they didn't know. And the challenge here was use your intuition, right? To look at the other person and describe to them how their parents treated them, the personalities of their parents, and how their parents tended to treat them, how the mother tended to treat them, the father tended to treat them, right? In their childhood, right? And I would keep notes of how many people said. And what I got was one after another. It was amazing. It was amazing. How did they say no to that, right? From the person that did it. Literally 100% of people, once they were in that state of mind and they got past the barrier that I can't possibly know and just trust whatever is coming up, got it right. So yeah, and we're all good with this higher mind. This is given to us by God, in my view, and then we go through life and have to find our way back there.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Because as kids, we start like that already. Like we are very intuitive, like it's the
super
world that
cool. Yeah,
indoctrinates us. Like, as you call what you call maladaptive training is really like we're being indoctrinated by people who have a maladaptive behavior and
yeah,
maladaptive,
and
So
you swim in their language and their presentations, how they talk to each other, the
yeah,
resonance field and the energy field. You
yeah,
know when you're in a slum, you can feel it. You know when you go to the beach and you know when you go to the redwood forest, there's a different energy fields,
yeah,
right? The energy fields in the home are part of the background energy fields are part of what help shape you, as well as the languaging and the judgments and the
yeah.
perspectives. So,
Absolutely.
uh,
Absolutely. It is incredible. Intuition is a real thing. It's like, again, like we call it psychic abilities. I feel like people who are called psychics are simply people who have tapped into their intuition and that have embraced it. That's really it. I feel like we all have that capability. And going back to your experiment, like that's exactly what I do. Like I read people chakra and trauma, and I go back to their trauma, to their seed trauma that caused all of their problems. And I do that by just reading their energy. And sometimes I read also things that have to do with facial expressions and how they contract their muscles. And I don't know what
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
reading. It's my intuition that is telling me those things. But I'm reading a lot of things that come from a lot of points. We are consistent with who we are and with our thoughts and with our belief system in all possible kinds of ways, from the wrinkle that you have on your face to the way in which you put your feet on the ground, to the way in which you talk, or how your voice comes out and how it's filtered by your
Sure.
vocal cords. All of these things are really a reflection of our inner world. And so you
Mhm.
can deduct a lot of things from external things, and there's a whole energy field that really comes out of us and we don't realize, and once we tap in it, we can really read it. So I think it's like I feel like I love your life experience that ultimately led you to become, as a child, very attuned to the problems of the oppressed, and to understand that it's the kids, is the real problem, and that there are higher levels of consciousness. I feel like it allowed you to connect the dots in a beautiful random way, to just like, by realizing that there is a problem, you also found the solution, because you're like, okay, there is a higher level of consciousness, there is a way to access the intuition and to do things that are for us supernatural, and these are the problems that we need to solve, so we can solve them in a supernatural way, which I think is what you're doing. And
Exactly.
yes, and so tell me more. So you went from being a journalist, and you were working on this like occult, and in general LSD also, and all different kinds of consciousness, and using the human mind in
Mhm.
supernatural ways.
Mhm. So, uh, so in terms of my life story moving forward, um, over the years, I kind of sensed a few years later I was outgrowing the daily structure of the paper. I hadn't made columnist, and I still had to go out on other assignments, the and I got more interested in the idea of taking a break. And then I went through a divorce and I got a new girlfriend, and we decided that we would I was going to go full freelance, and we were going to travel for a while. Anyway, the next thing that happened basically was while I was freelancing, I decided I couldn't keep up with my own ideas. So I decided to, I thought maybe I should have my own magazine. And I thought that's ridiculous. I don't know anybody with any money, and I don't know anything about publishing. I did know about the distribution system because I'd written a series about it, or a long article about it. But then I wrote it out, and as things transpired, I meet this fellow I knew, and he says, my boss might be interested in this. The boss was interested in it. Took a year or two, then I get a call from the boss saying we couldn't cut a deal because I had to have full editorial control. I didn't want to let him have it because some of the stuff he had published was so off the wall. I said, I'm a rising star, and I can't let you. I have to have final editorial control. Although the deal was really great, he bought into the magazine full time, and it would have been financially very valuable. But then he called me and said, "Will you come run a newspaper for me in Los Angeles, and a weekly newspaper, and I will. You can have full editorial control, and we'll do the national magazine with you having full editorial after you get that going." So I said yes. I came out to LA. That only lasted a 3 months or so, and he got ill, and they shut it down. And then I had brought together this great team on his dime of really talented people that met my standards. And I said, I brought him in from around the country, and he said, let's do our own weekly newspaper here. We obviously saw we can make a difference already in what we did with here. And I said, stick around. I said, so it took me 9 months to raise some money. I started the LA Weekly. And we were an overnight success with this same team. And but one of the areas of our coverage was, because it was human development. We had a column on it for local. We did national figures from time to time. Relatively recently, I would interview some. We had some people on the team who were interview them. So it was just part of the theme of what made the weekly successful, including all our entertainment coverage, the actually brilliance of our news reporting and our political coverage. And we became a cult in LA. 500,000 readers, everybody wanted to grab it. But part of it was that we were covering the human development movement here, because I thought out of the same mindset. So, and then I started creating for my change agent, even while I was at the weekly, I started creating nonprofits, spinning off nonprofits that dealt with social causes, like economic development affecting the poorer sections of LA. Called it Remaking LA. I did one on all the immigrants coming in at that time from Central America, where the wars were and the tortures and things like that. So we did something to wake up the public to how the U.S. was killing people in Central America. So I spun that off. And then after I left, started a TV network, didn't work out. But I also started a couple of other nonprofits, which dealt with money out of politics and a deeper level of community poverty relief in Los Angeles, and then nationally on money out of politics. And then I discovered this movement, and I started Equip Our Kids. And a year and a half, or 2 years into it, about a year and a half, 2 years into it, I was looking at every movement needs awareness, and needs to be wedded to boots on the ground, people active on a local level. And the ones the group organizations I found that were most active on the group of independent state alliances back on the East Coast. The first one was started in Massachusetts, and they had brought together program providers who had no business association and no public face, and educators who supported the movement, and were started and created this alliance that was now lobbying locally and on the state level and legislative level to get money into it and get support. And they were making a lot of progress. So I had them mentor me, and I got a group of people into a room, piped them in, explained their success, and we took a vote. There were 30 organizations in the room. 25 said yes. So we created the California Social Emotional Learning Alliance, which I ran for about 1.5 years, 2 years, and I found a great executive director. And she's now got it up to, like, I think, well past 5,000 members, and making a huge difference in the state in terms of getting money into the schools for social emotional learning. And then we equip our kids as in coalition with, we create a national office. We now got it up to 27 state office. We create a national office of the state to coordinate the work and the information flow and the best practices of the state alliances. So they're a big part of the movement. That's one of the coalitions. There's another coalition built around the mothership of the movement it's called Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. So we participate in that coalition too, as does the leader of the state alliances and a bunch of other groups. So on the grassroots level, in terms of organization as a movement, not just as a curriculum, but as a movement, there's very, very solid people doing really exquisite work across the country. But the challenges are very serious. So and one of the challenges, as I mentioned earlier, is getting the business community behind this. Very important. So now we're step by step, misstep by step, because it's not easy.
That's how you learn, right? That's why
That's how you learn.
like, I feel like you
We're
can't
starting to
really
put
learn without mistakes.
we're in the very early stages of figuring out how do we. But
Yeah.
I got a good initial group of people who are very smart, and we're thinking it through and having our conversations and trying to recruit more people to the conversation so that we can develop materials and a methodology to move the business community step by step behind this. So that's a big thing. And the other big thing we've been doing is, as it comes into the schools, of course, we hear more from parents, from principals about the difference between what the kids are learning how to be in school and what they go home to. So there's more about bringing the parents in. So more calls. We were thinking in this line anyway since COVID, because we created we called a emotional health toolkit for parents. Which we didn't create it, we curated it from other sources. And here's sources you could use, including Sesame Street, to develop some of these practices at home that'll help the children self-regulate better, help you relate to them better in these states of mind. And that's still on our website. But then to take it to the next level, in August, we launched something that looks like Netflix, but it's dozens of short videos broken down by 5 age groups plus a parenting group of skills you can learn. And we're building on that regularly, building that. And then, looking to raise money to market it because we need marketing money to really get it out there more.
I think it is really important because it's like, we said like about the waves, right? And so when there is like, everything is a wave, and so when obviously the parents are a more powerful wave than children because they have the financial and authoritarian power to tell their kids what to do, right? And also they have the power to go back to school and say, I don't like this, my child is behaving in a way that I don't understand anymore, we don't relate, or like, unfortunately, when society is maladaptive, when adults are maladaptive, this is the same thing that we're seeing at the macroscopic level with our governmental institutions and corporations that we are clashing right now because the population is awakening and has gone through a lot of pain, and pain is a huge catalyzer for awakening to consciousness. And so people are awakening because we've been put through a lot of stress and a lot of things, but our institutions are instead isolated and they haven't gone through that kind of stress. They have been the ones abusing us all the time. And so now we have this these two waves, like we are rising up and they're like going down, but we're going to be clashing. And ultimately the result of like who wins, in a sense, the result of that depends on how big and how powerful a wave is. And so it's important to back up this movement, like from a physical standpoint. It's really important to bring down the wave of the parents, bring down their hostility towards things that they don't understand, or that a lot of times the problem is that when parents face children that are very conscious and very aware and very capable of understanding what they're doing in their, especially family dynamics and couple dynamics, then it becomes more difficult for the parents to keep being like that, to keep fighting against one another, to keep being with partners that are toxic, to keep perpetuating egoic modalities and egoic behaviors with their families. So it's very difficult. They have to change. Like there is like either you allow this wave of consciousness to spread and to change you, or you're going to become an obstacle because, you are the wave of unconsciousness that clashes against the consciousness of your children. So it's very important. And now, like, this is really the phase of humanity in which we need to nurture consciousness at all levels. And that's why there is this huge way of this huge network of healers that are popping out like mushrooms, like there is a healer everywhere now. So like all these healers or these psychics, as you said earlier, like who doesn't have a therapist today? Who doesn't have a life coach today? So this is really our, this is the immune system of the body. When things need to change, we get to the cell level and we start talking to each single cell. We need to really get radical, capillary, And so this is really what we need to do. We need to really, the next step, I think you're right. The next step is really to not just, I feel like probably the most important step is really talking. I would prioritize talking to parents, to be honest, instead of talking to corporations, because yes, corporations are.
Oh, we did so that we have prioritized that, but now to get more buy-in, we need the
Yeah,
corporations.
because it's not just about making sure that they understand how important it is, so that they want it for their kids, but it's also important for them not stop it, because the first thing that happens, and we've seen it a lot in history, and even a lot of movies talk about this phenomenon, the fact that the kids come back to school with an education that is higher than what their parents know, or maybe their parents have been indoctrinated in this matrix, and now they subscribe into it. And when their kids come back home and they break, they make this castle of sand crumble, then the parents goes through trauma, the parents goes through a shock. And so it's really like now we are at the point where kids have the potential to induce trauma in their parents by making them realize a truth that parents are not ready to see, because they're not ready to unplug, because they're too old to unplug, because neurobiologically speaking, they do not have those areas of the brain that their kids are developing. They have not nurtured those areas, and so they can't possibly understand them because they are really neurobiologically not capable. So I think this is really the time in which we should at least work on brain plasticity for adults, like really increasing. And we're seeing that the wave of mushroom microdosing is really rising a lot in LA and in a lot of places in the world. And this, as much as music, there are a lot of people who are against psychedelics or who are not capable of going, especially the most conservative ones, which are the ones that we need to tackle at this point, right? And so I feel like in that case, maybe music is very well known for also improving brain plasticity, a certain kind of music. And I have interviewed Tom Rossi, who uses that kind of transcendental music, which is very important also to like allow brain plasticity. And I think this is really like something that should be prioritized as a society, not just by your movement, like to really heal adults, to allow them to have this cushion to cope with the change that is going to come much earlier now. Because if our society, if our generations started developing cortex and consciousness after 20 years of age, children, what you're doing is valuable and important, but you're really tapping into something that is already happening. Like you are part of a movement that is part of how our physical universe is changing. And so there are people like you that aid the we are the universe. So we are the ones
Yeah,
making things happen, right? And so you are part of the wave. And so you are the one bringing these things into school. And
yeah.
the kids are already, they are already having a consciousness that is much, much like their cortical brain is developing much, much earlier already. So the fact that we are, the universe is like a sponge, functions emerge when there is a need for them, and so when
For
people
sure.
like you emerge is because this is needed right now. And so this is going to happen regardless. So the fact that now the parents are going to be the next problem, not the kids, is really
Mhm.
true. Like now parents and the next generations are going
For
to
sure.
become the problem that can't stop this wave of consciousness. And so I'm glad actually that I'm in the spiritual community and I coach adults. And I'm glad that to see that so many adults today are really trying to understand their world better, to get out of PTSD. I think PTSD and the burnout that they went through in these past 4 years, especially, as being functional to this at the same time. It's functional because once you go through too much pain, your amygdala turns off and then you go into, hey, I have to do something, like I have to change this because I can't be in this pain any longer. And so everything is functional. And so now there are a lot of adults, but we need to really increase the portion of them. And as much as you see everything, it's like connected, right? As much as you're pushing this wave of kids, then they push the wave of parents, and the parents push
Amen.
the way of institutions, and so society changes.
Of
So
course, I
they
see that.
also, yes, and
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
beautiful. And it
of
all
course.
starts from people being
Right.
active changers, active participants in these waves that are already happening. And instead of just pushing around and be like, I don't know what I'm doing, you need to have a function, a purpose. So what do you feel is your purpose in this world?
So I'm a messenger.
Mm,
My purpose is to unfold for you the next level of messages that you might be able to step up into, or a chunk of you might be able to step up to. That's why the weekly was so successful. We opened up a whole vistas of possibility to with our beautiful staff and writing and choices we made and truths we told, politically, socially, got the air cleaned up in California with one of our investigations, changed the laws. So, yeah, I recognize myself as a messenger. And when I started doing the practice of uh, coaching came out of the coursework where we were practicing in schools, and then in that master's degree program I mentioned. And then we would practice modern therapy techniques, and my psychic levels were returning. And so I could read people, so I could kind of dive into where they needed to work from with the technique we were practicing. And so people started asking to come home to work with me. And I said, this is just a goof for me. It was not my career. So I said yes. And then by the end of the year, I had like 24 people coming at me, and I had to start charging for it. And then I did that for a couple of years, a year or two. And then I went back to journalism, mostly media, mostly, and then did the workshops and occasional, saw people on a very part-time basis. But what came out of that was when I started that, I said to one of my gurus, I said, this is like a whole other world for me. He says, well, it's not that. Basically, as messenger, you're a healer. And now as a healer, you're a messenger because all you're doing is teaching them, messaging them the skills you want to see in the world. That's what you're really
yes.
doing.
I love this, the unfolder, the
Yeah.
messenger. I
Yeah,
think it's
unfold as a
beautiful.
messenger. So
And it goes in all the things you've done, because I feel like, our purpose, we have that's the engine that really moves us. And so I feel like you had this role from the very beginning, from being
yeah,
the one in your family that your parents were fighting. You're like, I'm
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 out of
not
here.
like this. I'm not like this. And I'm sure you've been exposing your family to different things by reading, by being different. You have
Oh, for
unfolded to
sure.
them
Yeah. I have a
in the
very,
same way, right?
my children and my grandchildren. Yeah, we're very wonderful, humanly wonderful people on every level.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And so we have a very healthy family relationships. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And this is so important. It's so important that
Which
human beings.
surprises me, the shit out of me, but there you go.
What?
I said it surprises the shit out of me, but there you go.
You're like, how did that happen?
It had to happen. Yeah.
I feel like you really don't take really full credit for what you've done. And at the same time, I can see how, this unfolder encompasses all the levels of time, because what you've done is at the macroscopic level, you have first started by giving to LA the news, reporting the news and things that you cared about and you're solving today. So you have made people you have primed the population to be more ready to understand that there was a problem to solve. And then you have started to become part of the solution by exposing things through the
Right.
lay weekly.
Yeah,
And
for
so you
sure.
have primed them to become ready to understand that there are solutions. And then what kind of
Oh,
solutions?
that's yeah,
And
that's good insights. Thank you.
then you keep going and you have become part of the real final solution. Not only you have found it, but you have become part of it. So you see how you're really going, you're constantly nurturing and priming people to the next step, unfolding the next step, and you're taking them, you're taking them to point, and then after they're ready, then you go and again,
Mhm.
you give them the next step, and then they're ready, and then you give them the next step. But you're preparing people. You've been preparing LA
Mhm.
since you were a kid to
Mhm.
be ready to be the next step. And it goes full circle because you're ultimately solving the problem that you found as a child. And so the next step is going to be healing your parents as much as healing other people's parents so
That's
that
a
they
good, wow.
understand.
Very
Yeah.
smart. Very, very smart. Yeah, let's hear that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
This is what we
No
do,
worries.
like this is exactly what we all do. It's like we go into this arc, we go into this arc to go back full circle
Yeah.
into our origin, and the origin of people like you, like me, and like people who try to are problem solvers, instead of problem creators. We solve problems because our engine functions in a way that when we find ourselves in front of this choice, what do I do with this? Do I put my, the dust under the rug? Do I put my head under the sand, or do I try to solve this thing? And I feel like we are the generation that has, genetically and epigenetically speaking, we have really reached the point of cleansing genetically and epigenetically the
We're working
generational
it.
trauma.
Yeah,
And so
we are
we're not
working it.
anymore led by fear. We are led by consciousness or by love, And so we are not anymore, our parents were like, okay, I fear I'm not going to survive. I have to choose myself. I have to choose individualism. I have to choose opportunism. I have to, because their balance, genetically and epigenetically speaking, brought them to develop a brain in a way that was more towards the survival skills that I have to fight against everybody else. So when put in
Absolutely.
front of choices, that part always prevailed, which again is the amygdala, the part of the brain that has to do with the fight or flight mode. And instead, as we have healed that, we've made the next step. And the next step is to be more tending towards having a better cortical brain. And that makes every choice be a little bit more about love, a little bit more about empathy, a little bit more about compassion. And so when put in front of the same choice that your parents had, our generation, the generation of those who are the healers, is no, I want to heal people. I want to love. I want to be
Yeah.
compassionate. I want to change this. I'm not going to be caving in again in fear of not surviving myself. I want to change this. And so this is really a generational thing that is not just to do with generations, because you and I have different age, but I feel like generationally speaking is the generation of people who have cleansed from genetic and epigenetic signatures that forced us to develop a
Mhm.
brain, that forced us to make choices in a way that forced us to make to create a reality that was ultimately hostile for ourselves. Because if you believe the world is hostile, you're gonna project it outside, if you believe you're separate, you're going to project it outside. So you're going to create separations, wars, conflict, because you believe that. And instead, when you are empathetic, you're like, no, I want for people to join themselves to do. And even if the world is not ready, it's just a matter of like time. Things spread. And, sometimes it takes a whole lifetime because you have to touch on different points and do different things. And yourself, you don't know that you are actually what you're doing. You didn't know that you were going to be ending up today doing what you're doing right now. You just were yourself. But that's exactly the point of our purpose. You see, we have a purpose that is ingrained in us, in our engine, in how we function
Right.
from the moment we are born, in a sense. And so then life, in a way, we attract just randomly, because what you described is just a bunch of random things that happened to you. You know, I randomly attracted those things to me, and I said yes to them, and they created this potential and this skill set that now I have and I can use. And thanks to that, I've become this. But ultimately, you were, I think, primed to become this person. And obviously, you know, like life can be a
Sure.
little different. Not necessarily you develop that kind of potential. There's always a degree of freedom in what we can do. But I think we ultimately are these functions all the time, and I really love it. And like this really has to do with our neurobiology, you know, and that's why the what you're doing is so important. The social emotional learning is so important, because that allows kids to really develop the parts of the brain that they need to develop to manage their emotions better, to cope with stress better, to have better social skills, to create better networks, because that's the main thing we need to do in our next step in humanity, to create this network that unites us so that we create this cortical connection as a society, not just as people. And society is a reflection of our internal world. So if we do that as children, we're going to be projecting that outside necessarily. That's exactly, we cannot not do that. So I think what you're doing is really the real solution to all conflicts in the world, and that we're just
That's pretty
figuring
what
it
I
out.
concluded. You got to retrain humanity.
I think the whole world
Yeah.
should just
One of the,
adopt
what,
this sort of
one of the
thinking.
points I didn't make before when we were talking about being psychic is that when I talked about the divine essence, part of what I learned about my own psychic abilities, I can if I look in a person's eyes long enough, I can see the divine nature. In other words, the idea that if God is going to extend itself into human forms, right? Create us, right? Then it's got to be creating from itself. And so we all have a divine element that's meant to lead us, a kind of way of relating to the world in a healthy way that's innate to us. And often our madness and craziness comes from not living that out. But so when I was coaching, it was like, here's your divine element. Here's how you're not living it out because you're caught in this. So if you start making these changes towards honoring and seeing that this person, this other part of you that manifests this way is real. It's actually you, right? The rest of it is trying to get along with the world.
Yeah,
And so let's discuss what changes you can make to align with that, what I see in you, and which I can explains all the things about your life that you actually appreciate about you, right? This is your divine way to relate to the world in a healthy way. That's
yeah.
good. And by the way, another point I want to make is about AI. Um, uh, heard both of the arguments. Actually, going to create more jobs. It's actually going to cost us all these jobs, right? But in terms of how it's starting to be evolved in the communities I know, there's a lot of people starting to use it for healing,
Oh,
um,
for healing, for lawsuits, for things like
for
that. It's incredible.
tremendous,
Like I use
tremendous amount of
ChatGPT all the
potentials.
time to
Yeah.
like it's a word of like I like it's so interesting. Like using like I think ChatGPT can really change the world for the better if used in the right way, because
Mhm.
there is one bad side. Like the downside of AI is that it is trained by humans, and so it's inherently censored, you know, unless
Right.
you truly train it.
But it depends on who, remember, AI is sensitive to what you're asking of it, right? So
Yes.
if the human knowledge of consciousness is already out there, right? So just this morning, I started my morning with a call from one of our board advisors. So you should know about it anyway, because she maybe you want to interview her. But um, and it was how are we making progress on using AI to develop this trainings tools that parents need, so when something's up, they'll learn, they could quickly go there and say with with an icon or um, a my son, this is happening with my kid. I tend to want to do it this way. What's a more effective way of talking to him about this, right? So we were thinking about where we are in the stage of developing that, right?
Yes, I think this is beautiful. This is a great idea, actually. I didn't think of it that way, but I think it's
Yeah.
incredible because especially, like
The
I
best
think
of the
what
best of human knowledge is out there as well as the worst of it. Isn't it?
yeah, like
Yeah.
well, it's not just about that. I feel like it's really important, and we're gonna get there. We're gonna get politically speaking to understand that because everybody is using AI as a source of knowledge, then AI must be like Google in the sense that it must contain everything. You can't select what to teach to AI, like, because there are certain things that AI is very misinformed about. And if you ask AI the information about history, it's gonna tell you like is as much is as misinformed as a history book written by the winners. It's like because obviously it's being trained by people who skew its knowledge, and so it's important. We're gonna get to a point where AI is gonna be there are going to be policies and regulations in place that don't allow AI to be trained in a skewed way because that can skew the knowledge
Yeah,
of the
for
entire
sure.
world.
For
So we're
sure.
going to get there.
Where
So
it's
right now it's limited, right? But I love what you're saying. And I think that overall, this is the thing that right now we live in a world in which we're very much in patches, so certain patches of the world have reached a higher level of consciousness than others. And so there are a lot of families who are very dysfunctional and a lot of families who have healed. And so how do we transfer the knowledge
the
from one
knowledge and the
place to
ability
another?
and the
And that's
absolute,
exactly
yeah,
what
yeah.
AI is doing.
How do
AI
you
has created that connection, the cortical connection, like like in the brain, there are two main parts, like the white matter and the gray matter. So the gray matter is where the body of the cells are, and the white matter is where all the connections are. And so plasticity has to do with increasing not the gray matter, but the white matter, because it's a way of increasing the connections. So what AI is doing from a standpoint of evolution of what ChatGPT or things like that, I'm talking about that, are doing from evolutionary standpoint in humanity is creating this brain plasticity of connections. Now everybody can access the portal of knowledge from AI and download information as much as people who have already tapped into the consciousness of the whole can meditate and download information. People who have not can tap on ChatGPT and download information. Like it's kind of like I feel like
as,
it's
as they overcome their resistance to it, yes.
yes, absolutely. So it's all about how you use it. There are a lot of again, everything is about how we use it, and there is good and bad in everything. And for good and bad, I'm talking about things that perpetuate unconsciousness are bad. Things that bring us more closer to consciousness and to light and to blooming and to springing again, those are what we want. Those are more desirable, right? And so there are ways also AI, there are also some image tools that, that they're really like very, very biased, in which you ask to give you a certain kind of person. And the psychological profile is often very misaligned from the image that you get. And as a psychic, I can see that oftentimes they're completely, trained to give you a certain kind of personality that is in fact the opposite. And so when you go in life, it's basically it's another way of of training people in the wrong way, right? And so we really have to be careful in that. Like AI has to be objective, because if AI becomes censored and filtered, we're prepared. It's part of the wave of unconsciousness. And instead, there is a AI like ChatGPT or others, that you can interrogate and ask questions and ask what kind of I have these
Yeah,
symptoms.
I see
What
what's
do I
happening.
have? Yeah, this
Yeah.
is beautiful. And I think parents like allowing this to become a tool to help parents deal with this moment of change, with this new wave of consciousness that is going to start very early in their children, parents and grandparents. This is an incredible way of really preventing this clash between these two waves and making it a smoother transition to
Right.
really bloom into this beautiful flower of consciousness that we're supposed to be.
Well, very well put.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
The
And
one of our council, we need to wrap up, I think.
no, it's a really don't worry. Like I love our
All right.
conversation. I feel like people are gonna love it too. So keep going.
Okay. So one of our business council members, who's a futurist and a genius, he said, "Well, let me run AI on how to address." We got a 45-page brilliant document on how to deal with corporations at the moment and what their soft points are and how to present this to them. It was quite amazing, quite eye-opening for me.
Yeah.
What came
I
out of
think
that.
we need more people like you, to like more people, like empathetic people to
Mhm,
who have awakened to consciousness, who have this kind of experience to really
mhm.
go to power. But if they don't go to power, we really need for people to be persistent. I feel like what I love to teach, to show people through this podcast is how the journey, like if you would have surrendered to your journey, it would have probably gone the same way. But the fact that you persisted and you kept going, that was what really brought you far. And so I think people really have to have this persistence to keep going in order for their wave to keep rising instead of being just the weak wave that just stops working. And so we need
Uh-huh.
to surrender to our purpose, but we need to be persistent in our purpose once we find it. And I think this is the major problem people encounter in their life, which is not understanding their purpose, like not understanding that it's all related, all the things you've done in your life, ultimately, as you can see now you can see the bigger picture and you're like, so I've been this my whole life, right? But you see it only at the end. And if we had this understanding from the beginning that our inner engine makes us make choices and take decisions and choose people and be attracted or repulsed by things in ways that are ultimately functional to the role that we have in the world and to the kind of knowledge we need to acquire, that will be a much smoother travel, like journey for everybody. Like I also
Well,
had a very troubled life in a sense. Like I went through a lot of things and I was like, and the pain really came from me not understanding what my purpose was. I thought I was going through negative things, and instead I was acquiring knowledge and skills and things that were necessary for my actual purpose in the world, right? So once you understand that and you embody it, you're like, okay, I've done a lot of work. So I feel like all the ups and downs that we perceive come from our society giving us, we live in a society that really has these labels and these job positions and titles and things that have nothing to do with the actual function we have in the physiology of humanity and of the earth. So
mhm.
really, we are given these labels that are functional to capitalism and to corporations, but have nothing to do with our actual function in the world. And so that causes a lot of pain and suffering because then we have our function and we have our
Good
own,
point.
in Native Americans had a much better alignment with this, and they really, they identify with spirit animals and the bear and
Yeah.
all of these things, like the eagle and the serpent, and so all of these things they used to identify with, and we have this whole idea in the Western world, like snakes are bad and bears are dangerous, or like, and instead for them was just like, oh, I am a snake because the snake has this power and has this function. And I am, a bear because the bear is more of a family man, a protector, and I am this. And so that is way closer to our actual purpose in the world. And these purposes
No,
we
I
find,
understand that. Yeah.
yeah.
I was initiated into two different, one was a healing ceremony, and one was a pipe ceremony, but in two different Native American tribes. Um, but in one that gave the pipe ceremony, it said my medicine animal is a red-tailed hawk
Mm,
who show up constantly in my life, including
mm.
one. Hawks will never go into a building, including one that flew into my house once and landed on my desk. I guess to give me a message that I was overworking. So, uh, so I totally relate to that concept. The larger point about it is that in our loss of true identity, right? We have created magnificent pathways to stay in that lost identity.
Yeah.
Right.
Stay in the matrix. Yeah,
Stay in the
exactly.
matrix, exactly. Which
And
is
so I
so
think a
compelling.
lot of pain comes from that because then people are like, okay, so, the ups and downs we perceive really come from that, from the fact that we perceive, oh, I have to be this kind of person. I have started studying for this, and then I have to start. And so this is what the world tells me that my career is supposed to look like. But because the world, this fictitious reality is just nonsense, and it's just ego, and it's just capitalism, then your actual function is going to be completely different. Your actual journey is going to be completely different, because that is the truth. That is the truth of how the universe works, about the divine order of things works. And so you can't change the truth. And so we all go through these ups and downs and burnouts and things, but ultimately we're actually going straight. What we don't realize is that the ups and downs that we perceive are just due to the expectations that we give to ourselves through societal pressure. But we are actually going straight. Like you thought you were, going all of these things and be like, I don't know exactly what I'm doing. You're actually going in a straight line towards the human you were supposed to be as an adult, and towards the purpose you were supposed
Nicely
to
put.
for humanity, but you didn't know. Yeah.
So here's another point about this that I've noticed. One of the things about me and my journey is that I was very supportive of the women's liberation movement, right? And I had for years thought women need if you go, I'll share with the audience my where they can hear my audios from the workshops. They're all free. But one of the things I argued was that when women are liberated from the matrix, they're going to be the leaders.
Oh yeah.
We have to. The more women get, more we can liberate leaders, the more men are going to be liberated. Right? You're an example. But the first person to call me today, the women board member, her name is Barbara Annis. She's been very big in getting corporate world to adopt break the glass ceiling for women. Very big, and has a lot of contacts in the corporate world, and she's on our business council. She just last week released a book that every woman and every man should read. It's called The Brilliance of the Female Mind and How It's Going to Transform the World.
Oh, I love it already.
You're a brain person. It's also a lot of science on the capacity of women's brains to handle multiple complexities once they're liberated from the matrix, from being too down in the matrix, which I talk about in what I call the male wound and the female wound, the king wound for the male and the queen wound for the woman. In my talk about relationships, so this book is just out. Again, the title of it, the brilliance.
We're gonna put the link if you like. If you
The brilliance of the female mind.
And I think it's beautiful what it is true. So I describe to people the masculine and feminine energy from a standpoint that I feel like people are very unaware of, and that can be very comforting at the same time. Right. So I feel like in nature in general, the female is the tree and the male is the pollen. Okay, so these two beings are necessary to each other, because without the pollen, the trees will not exist, because nothing will be pollinated and nothing will be planted, because pollination is needed to make the seed, and the seed is needed to make the new tree. So the trees will not be able to colonize the earth without the pollen moving around and dispersing their genes. But without the tree growing and establishing itself and leading, there will be no pollen, right? And so women, because we create men, we create women, we create everybody. We are the trees, right? We give rise to everybody who colonizes the earth. So humanity had this huge, long phase of conquering everything and conquering the land. And the last time we started conquering the land was 500 years ago with the American continent. I mean, we had already colonized it, but they wiped it away and recolonized it with more people. And there are a lot of reasons for that, like people moving from all over the place due to climate change, due to wars ongoing. This is really a Noah's Ark. The United States has become a Noah's Ark, where all the different cultures and kinds of people and genes are being stored, like from a divine perspective, it has become a Noah's Ark. But we need to become aware of that. And so it's important that men understand that not just men, but the masculine. The masculine is not necessarily men. Also, women have a lot of masculine in them. And today we are going towards having a lot of women in power who are very masculine, in fact. And so we need to understand.
By the male,
Yeah, and so we need to understand that the switch in humanity will happen when we will stop conquering. We will stop having this masculine phase, which is the pollen. The pollen goes, conquers, fights, wipes away, destroys, because that's what the pollen does. It's dispersion and conquering, dispersion and conquering. But once you put roots, then you need to switch to the feminine side. And the feminine side is the one that nurtures, that puts roots, that takes care of community, that settles, that really starts being present and be like, okay, I have conquered all of this. Now let's handle all of this kingdom, right? Because otherwise, what am I going to do with it? So we can't constantly be in our conquering mode. And you see that now that we've finished conquering the earth, this masculine energy is popping out of the earth like a sperm to go to Mars. Like it's constantly this masculine energy. We are expelling it because it is time for the earth to settle, and so the fact that we're starting to go, we have started a while ago to put out satellites and things, out in space, because the earth is pollinating, the earth is really creating all this, but in all of this masculine energy that we have on earth, we had it for a long time. Now it's too much. And this is the time in which it has to go out, because it is time for the earth to mature and to become the full female being that it is. We call the earth female for a reason, and so it's important that we start switching, and we're seeing it everywhere, like even like all these movement, or like all these men becoming very feminine, the homosexual movement and the pride and all of these things. It's really part of that transformation, like we don't realize that from a physical and energetic standpoint, we are switching towards a more feminine world, and that has nothing to do with extinction of men as physical being. It has to do more the way in which we think, the part of the brain that we use, because again, the fight or flight mode is the one that conquers and the fights, and the cortical brain is the ones that creates connections and the nurtures. And so it all goes together. It's all a reflection of us, and so it's just going to happen. Again, nothing bad can happen. It's just a matter of like cycling and waves and dispersing all this trauma that we had, and finally settling and nurturing each other and be at peace.
Yeah, in Kabbalah theology, the Hebrew word for the masculine energy it actually translates as knowing. This is 2 and 2. This is here. This is there. This is knowing. Female word, and we all have female and male in us, but the female word is understanding. So what's the relationship of this to this, to this, to this, to this?
I love it.
So back to Barbara's. So Barbara's book talks about the female brain being more set up for the understanding parts of it. And years ago, I participated in a men's group run by Robert Bly and Michael Mead, the anthropologist, hundreds of men. And Michael had this thing he would say to the men's groups. He said, "You know the difference between a woman's brain and a man's brain?" Say, to shock us. Say, the woman's brain is like a 6-lane highway between the lobes and the abilities to deal with dimensionalities, right? Especially when liberated. The male brain guys, you should know, we've got a dirt path. So he was making it about to get out of your egos and understand. You better. There's a way to develop relationships with women and with your own feminine side. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's so important. That's so important. And that's exactly the point that I feel like most people don't understand that it's not about men and women, it's about masculine and feminine. I mean, we all have it, and we all can use our nostrils, just our nostrils, re-equilibrating and calibrating the way in which we breathe, using both nostrils at the same time in the same way. And guys, if you try it, you're going to see that you're using either one of your nostrils to breathe at all times, because that's really how the masculine and feminine energy work, right? So either one can give you more access to masculine and feminine, to the different parts of your brain. So it's important to recalibrate and to really intentionally breathe with both. And it's not something that really comes, again, it's everything is bidirectional in the body, and also it's a reflection. And so how we think determines how we breathe. That if we breathe differently intentionally, we change how we think. And so this can be a beautiful way of really changing your mindset and switching more towards your feminine side, and really recalibrating as a human being to become whole. Well, I think we had a great conversation. Unless you want to add anything else, I was about to say a joke about women and men brain, but like I'm like, no, this is already enough. What you said is already enough.
So our website for people is
Oh yeah,
just to get this information across, maybe you
please.
put it at the beginning of our website is equip, EQUIP, the word equip, our, OUR, kids, KIDS, and it's a .org, meaning we're a nonprofit. It's not a .com. So equipourkids.org, and you can find our offerings there, including how to get involved with us, potentially, So check out that website. And you can always email us for more information or text us for more information.
Please. And if you have anything coming up soon, let me know, like soon or in a couple of months. So like you can tell us.
Okay, if any major events are coming up, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Couple of things I want to share with you when we end this. What else? And then just a reminder, one of the ways I express this reminder is we've got 3 generations who have been somewhat acclimated to knowing about John Lennon's song, about if all the world could be in peace, imagine the song, imagine all of us living life in peace, right? So the most important thing for an adult to understand these days is it's a skill set. It's not just a wish. And it's a skill set you're not trained in, right? And if you want to live in peace, then you got to go find yourself that skill set. You can start with adult nonviolent communication training in your communities. You can look for other ways of groups that will help you expand your own sense of, I'm traumatized this way. I got my therapist, or maybe there's all kinds of groups online that are bringing the larger consciousness into healing our you might call not helpful behavior ways, and all our traumas behind it and all the emotions we carry around it. You can always find groups online. So I encourage everybody to think about getting on that train any way you can, and then any way you think you can help children get to that stage faster, because we got to create a generation that is really, really powerfully transformative. It lives it, speaks it, shows it, demonstrates it, and creates the vortexes that we live in from it. And the alternatives you don't want to think about. But you need to think about them and say the real solution is retraining ourselves. That's the real solution, not just writing a next check to the person who's struggling. They're struggling, you got to do both, write the check, but also you got to really get behind the transforming human behavior and consciousness. And social emotional learning is a major intervention from the best of humanity and from spirit in making that happen, even with its limitations and flaws. It's when, we've got to learn how to use it to the best, but that's our part of our learning, how to use it, not just have it. Okay.
So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jay. This has been really, really nourishing for me, I feel like for everybody, really. I'm really glad that we connected and that we've been able to give exposure to what you're doing and to give exposure to the social emotional learning to a lot of different parents and families and all kinds of upbringings. And thank you so much for being here, for allowing me to interview you, and for giving us all your wisdom and all your experience in all these incredible fields that you've been working on and at this incredible level. So thank you so much. And I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, because I did a lot. And I'll see you next time.
Great. Thank you so much. I enjoyed it amazingly too.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.